And I'll give us one more minute here. Well, let's go ahead. Call to order the Rotary Club of Ames, May 8th, 2023. And as we look at that, welcome to the Rotary, beginning our second century of service. Just imagine what we've accomplished and imagine what we have yet to do. If you would, please stand for the Pledge of Allegiance and for a moment of silence. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America, to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, liberty and justice for all. Anybody within the club or the organization needing a special moment of recognition or memory, but we have been impacted in incidences down in Texas. So let's keep those in our thoughts and prayers, and always any or friends that you personally might have that you want to think of at them as well. So let's take a moment. All right, thank you. Be seated, please. And I'm not sure if we have any special guests to be recognized, other speaker who will share later. Shall we do the song first? Yeah, thank you. So Dr. Bennett, if you go ahead and please lead us.
Well, I'll be happy to, but before I do that, I'm going to give you a little vignette. I was taking my last trip when I was in the Army in 1965. And one Saturday morning, I was in Paris in a hotel about a block from the Arch of Triumph. And I noticed in the morning, getting up, there was lots of activity on the street. And so I decided to get up, walk down to the corner of the arch and see what was going on. And there was an absolutely humongous crowd, because this was May 8th, 1965. 1965, the 20th anniversary of VE Day. And there was a huge celebration with troops and trucks and tanks. And I actually saw de Gaulle walk under the Arch of Triumph, try to get a picture, but I'm not sure I actually got him. But it was quite a day to then go down to the Place de la Concorde, where you could look up the whole the Champs-Élysées and see all these units marching and coming down from the Arch of Triumph. It was a very memorable day. And not only that, it was a beautiful day, sunny and so forth. I'll never forget that. May 8th, 1965, 20th anniversary of VE Day. Today is May 8th. So to all of you out there, let me welcome you with welcome to you from Ames Rotary, Nevada, London, or gay Paris, from far off lands or the USA. We're glad that you are here today. Come back again whenever you're near. Join us and then we'll make it clear. Around the world, you will always be welcome at Rotary.
Thank you, Louis. Significantly appreciate that. And I had that as a note today. In fact, this day in history will end of the European campaign of World War II. Happen until August 14th is VJ Day, end of all hostilities for World War II. It's neat that you share. That's incredible. Few announcements. Club Social next week at the Plex, which means there won't be any guest speakers. Live stream for online audience. We invite you to attend in person, talk with fellow Rotarians. Lunch will be provided. And as part of that, guests that you'd like to bring, please bring them also as guests of the club. Then the following week, we're doing another fellowship, but this one will be an off-site fellowship on May 22nd. I'm going to ask that you would reach out to me if you're unable to be next week's meeting for final sign-up. There are the 9 locations that are hosting us. So you'll have that opportunity next Monday to sign up, or if you want, go ahead and send me an email and I'll get so that you can being hosted by those many guests. Appreciate you doing that. And then on May 31st, we will not have a meeting because that's Memorial Day. So that really takes care of the rest of the month. And we'll be back at the Plex on June 5th. Just a few photos we had from our so I just wanted to, again, thank everybody that was not only there, but that financially contributed to the club. We were able to raise over $700 and just a significant impact, again, during our month of mental awareness during May. And again, we'll talk a little bit more about that with our upcoming speaker today. I also had today in history, interestingly enough, in 1980, smallpox was declared eradicated by the WHO. And so here we are now in 2023 trying to accomplish the same in the challenge to eradicate polio. Easy way to help finance that is to do what we discovered with Miss Allison. And again, I reach out and thank her for that. And that's join the Polio Plus Society. And you know what, if things go well, it's a commitment to give $100 a year. Maybe you're only going to be giving for 2 or 3 years, but it's just another way for us to eliminate and eradicate this life-changing disease. So I want to thank you for that. Today is also known as World Red Cross Day, World Ovarian Cancer Day. For those of you that are preparing desserts for Mother's Day, it's also today National Coconut Cream Pie Day. And one other thing that happened on this day in history, Coca-Cola was created in 1886. So today is National Coke Day. Can you believe it? They get their own day in commemoration of all they've done. Well, with all of that said and done, I think we've made all of our announcements in our preparation for today. So Mason, I'll turn over the presentation opportunity to you. Thank you.
Great. Thank you, Kent. Well, it's my pleasure to introduce our guest speaker today. Nick Toornstra has been hopefully I pronounced that somewhat close, has been a paramedic since 2012, beginning in the St. Louis area. And since starting at Mary Greeley Medical Center, Toornstra has taken on the role of the EMS Supervisor, where he manages the daily operations of the EMS department. In that time, the department has worked to develop the ARCH program, And that's what Nick's going to talk about today, the alternative response for community health program. So hence the acronym ARCH, a 911 dispatched unit that responds to calls that do not necessarily require a police or ambulance response. Nick has worked to implement this program in Ames over the past 3 years. Its pilot program is 40 hours per week for a 6-month period, and the department then will work to grow and develop the program into a permanent fixture here in the Ames and Story County area. So my pleasure to bring Nick on. Nick, go ahead and unmute. And if for folks on the call, if you do have questions that come up while Nick is speaking, certainly drop them into the chat, and then we can address them once Nick's presentation is finished up, and we should be good to go. So go ahead, Nick. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you, Mason. I also have Lindsay Smith here with me. She's my partner on the program. So we've been working together on this pilot program. So I'll talk a little bit about the background of what led up to, the foundation of ARCH, and then a little bit more about some of our findings and results from the 6-month pilot program that we did. So let's see if I can click these slides ahead. There it goes. So we're talking about a history in the announcements. So this is a picture of the first 911 call. That rotary phone there was the phone they used in 1968. The gentleman you see on the phone is state senator from Alabama. He placed the first 911 call February 18, 1968, so about 55 years ago. And what they were, obviously the goal was to go from a 7-digit number, that was local to each community, to have a national phone number that was easily recognized and remembered, and something that could be used in an emergency. And so there you see him making that phone call. I don't think it was an actual emergency in that photo, but since then, we have had, across the country, here's some stats from Iowa alone just in the past year. So Iowa has had 1.1 million calls annually to the 911 system. That was the year 2021. That was the most up-to-date numbers so far. And so if you multiply that out from 50 other states, and with much larger populations, you can kind of guess the amount of 911 calls that come into different call centers every year for different types of emergencies. Those Ames statistics there, you see 28,455 police calls in Ames alone last year. That doesn't include EMS or fire calls as well. And so what happens when that call volume grows is that a lot of those calls will fall outside of the expertise of law enforcement, fire, EMS, but nonetheless, they're the ones who respond to those 911 calls. And one such call took place about 10 years ago in February, and it was a call that I made when I lived in St. Louis. And so this is kind of what illustrates the reason that we put ARCH together, kind of in a funny way. So I lived in St. Louis in a house that was over 110, 120 years old at the time. And I was home with my kids, and my wife was at work, and I was home watching them on a Saturday. It was a Super Bowl weekend, I remember. And what happened was they were upstairs. So I had a house that had a finished attic, and then a second floor, and then a main floor, and then a basement. So 4 levels of this house. And the finished attic was the playroom for the kids. And there was a half bathroom up there that someone had put in, and they were up there playing. And then, so that was kind of their time and my time to kind of work it downstairs. And I was enjoying the quiet. Well, when kids are quiet, usually that means something bad's going on. And they came downstairs and said, the toilet's flooding. And so I'm like, well, I probably need to get a plunger or something and go up there and fix it. Well, I went upstairs, and they had broken off the the water supply for the toilet had broken off. And usually there's a little shutoff valve right there. Well, that broke off too. So if you can imagine a half-inch PVC pipe sticking out of the ground and just flooding water, constantly, with no way to shut it off from that floor. So I ran and grabbed a bunch of towels that were nearby, threw it on top, and I ran into my basement. And in the basement, of course, is where the shutoff valves for water supply lines are. And I went around, I went to the main shutoff and I turned that off, and I ran back upstairs to assess the problem and kind of clean up the mess. Well, when I moved the towels that I had laid earlier, the water was still flowing. There's still water shooting out of this PVC pipe. And so I'm confused because I thought I'd shut the water off. So I ran back down three flights down into the basement and started shutting off everything I could find. Everything that looked like it could turn off, I was turning it off and turning and turning. And I thought, well, one of these must turn it off upstairs. So I ran back upstairs, moved the new towels that I'd put down, and looked again, and the water's still coming out. So this is about 25 minutes into this ordeal. And now I've got water cascading down into my living room. So through my attic, down the second floor, down into the living room, and down into the basement. So just a wall of water, just pictured down like a waterfall between my door frames. And the kids, they're jumping and playing in the water, singing, "It's raining, it's pouring," and having a good time. And I'm, doing my best not to scream at them, because they don't know any better. And, but I'm starting to panic because I haven't been able to find how to shut this water off. I don't know what's going on. So in that moment, when I kind of panicked, I grabbed my phone and I called 911. And they asked what was going on, and I told them, and I said, I don't know really how you can help, but I need somebody to come help me because I'm panicking and I can't shut my water off. I thought maybe they had, emergency access to the water department or some kind of way to shut the water off at a main valve in the street or so. I had no clue, but I knew that they needed to come and help me. And so they showed up, the fire department showed up, 4 or 5 of them. And I said, "This is what's going on." And they're like, "Well, we're not, we're here, but we're not really the guys for this job, but we'll help you." And so we went in the basement and we were looking around, and, there was water flowing down into the basement. And, when you move into a house, the previous owner always leaves behind a wooden shelf full of paint cans. That shelf in your basement, there's always like a shelf there with all the old paint colors from the house. Well, behind there, we moved that out of the way, and there was actually another main water supply that came in at some point in the 120 years of this house, came in to the house. And so they shut that off. And finally we went upstairs and the water had finally shut off, and we dried it all up. And of course, now we've got drywall, electrical, floor, like it's all soaking wet. We actually ended up staying in a hotel for about 2 months after that because we had a newborn, and so we didn't want to be around all the new construction that was going to have to take place. And so that story kind of illustrates what people kind of think in a situation that they don't know how to handle. I could have called a plumber if I had been in a rational state of mind, but I wasn't there because I was so frustrated and so worked up over what was going on that my natural instinct was to call 911. And that's what we find happens. I've been a paramedic for over 10 years, is people call 911 when they don't know what else to do. And sometimes that falls outside of the realm of what we are able to do to help people. And so we designed Arch to respond to these calls. It's alternative response for community health. Certain types of 911 calls that fall outside of that area of expertise, and we put experts in those positions to assess and kind of figure out what the problem is, and find better solutions for the crisis that they're having at that moment, because the police, the fire, the EMS providers aren't necessarily the ones to do that. So we have Lindsay, you see in the picture there, standing outside the door, and then myself, I'm a paramedic, and Lindsay's a social worker. And so we respond to 911 calls that the dispatchers have determined don't really meet criteria for police. So things like a welfare check, which would be something like, my loved one is not responding to my phone calls or texts, haven't been heard from in a few days. They called into work or haven't called into work, haven't shown up. Can you go see if they're okay? Socioeconomic needs. So sometimes they just, having trouble making ends meet, or and somebody calls 911 on their behalf, or mental health needs. So people who have mental health crisis or just mental health needs, and they need help kind of managing their care in a moment of crisis. And so we don't have a phone number that you can call to get Arch to come out to you. It's all done through the 911 system, because there are community resources in place. And so we want people to use those first if that's what they're used to using. But then in that moment, when the crisis hits, or when they kind of don't know anything else in the community, they'll call 911. And so that's what we're there to kind of fill that gap in. Let's see. Okay. So we started a 6-month trial, ran from October through April. So just about 6 months worth of kind of responding and kind of figuring out how this works in real time, and gathering data for potentially expanding the program. So since April, we've been running kind of business as usual, under the same kind of parameters that we established during the trial. But we kind of capped our data at the 6-month period, just so we kind of had a picture of what was going on day to day. So you see kind of that's the vehicle we respond in. And the reason it is the way it is, we chose the Durango because we don't want people to feel like we're escalating the situation. So you can kind of see in the picture there's a above where the visor is, there's an orange light. There's flashing orange lights, and that's about all that we respond with. And then the logo on the side of the door. And that's really just to be discreet and to maintain privacy, so we don't have a bunch of people gathering around trying to figure out what's going on. And then you see the interior's got a little bit more going on. There's normally a computer in there that we can kind of read notes and access information about the call. And that's put in there by the dispatch center. So we use the police dispatch center, and they'll send us notes and everything that we can see. And then there's a little medical bag that we use sometimes if people have medical needs going on. So yeah, again, the welfare checks, mental health crisis, and suicidal persons, and then anything that kind of falls outside of that police response that they typically go on. And we're staffed with social workers, so that's Lindsay, and she does the bulk of the work on the scene, and then the paramedic is there to do like a quick medical assessment and make sure there's not an actual emergency that maybe got missed in the phone call. And once that's done, then Lindsay will take over and kind of assess what the needs are, and try to point them in the right direction. So she's not taking on like a caseload that you would find, that a typical social worker might have. It's more of, what do you need and how can we best get you there in an efficient manner? So it's not really, she's not managing anything long-term. It's just, hey, what happened that got you into this crisis today, and how can we help get you out of it, and then help you get back to the resources you typically use? Because a lot of times we would find that those people are involved with other resources in the community, but sometimes they just need that reminder, or they need that help to kind of get back on track. And so we were funded through grants written by the Mary Greeley Foundation. They wrote several grants that were matched as well. What that funded was the 6 months of salary for the two of us, and then the purchase of the Durango, and then the upgrades to it. So the lighting and the some of the additional pieces that were kind of one-time costs there. And here's some data that I'll share, and this thing is blocking my thing, but we did, what does it say, 122 8-hour days? It's blocked by the thing there, but yeah, so we did 122 total days. We were in service 8 hours each day. So that's a third of a 24-hour period, 10 a.m. till 6 p.m. typically. We did make some adjustments for various reasons. Sometimes we just wanted to see what a later time of day would look like. And other times it was just more for scheduling reasons, but 122 full days. We had the two of us working, or sometimes I would swap out with another paramedic from our crew, but Lindsay was on there for, I would say 99% of the calls. We responded to 266 total calls in Ames. So we restricted our response area to the city of Ames. So we didn't go outside into the county. We just really wanted to focus on the community here and just limit, because of our response area, we didn't want to go too far out and be delayed too long. So we estimate about 32 visits to the ER were avoided. So meaning that we got on scene, and in a typical situation, this might be someone who would go to the ER for suicidal ideations or mental health crisis, and we were able to successfully divert them from avoiding an ER visit. We're still working on calculating like what that cost savings was. Those numbers are still being finalized, but that's one metric that we've been following, is avoiding the ER, because that's really, sometimes a lot of these people have, they have care established, they have a care plan, they have providers, they have doctors who are involved in their care. And so when they reach that moment of crisis, the ER isn't necessarily the best place to get, the resolution, just because they already have those components in place, and the ER doesn't add any new components to them. So 59 ambulance trips avoided, either by, keeping them safe at home, or, sometimes we would transport them if we felt like that was an appropriate resolution. 112 of those calls were calls out that the police did not have to respond to. Sometimes they would respond with us, or they were there already and they would call us back. But 112 times we avoided having to have the Ames police respond, which shows the type of calls that start coming into the police department that aren't necessarily appropriate for them to be on. So we're just trying to make a more specialized response. 20 students from the Ames School District. Some of those that's 20 individual responses. Sometimes it's the same individual, but 20 separate times that we would have to go to somebody involved with the school, either at the middle school or the high school. There would be times where potentially they were a student who was in the home that was not identified as such. And so there could be more, but those are ones that were specifically students. And 14 Iowa State students. We had a little more trouble breaking into the Iowa State community, not for any negative reasons, but they have kind of their own student health system, and they have a lot of mental health resources. So they encourage their students to utilize those. But there were times where we found ourselves in the campus area talking to the students, and they've been supportive too of the program. They're not resistant, but I think that it's easier to utilize the dispatch center that we have with the police department, because they have their separate police department as well. So it's just more of a logistical complication really than anything. So we're looking at ways to kind of get inroads with the Iowa State. And this last statistic is the 472 calls missed. So what we were tracking there was the amount of times that ARCH was needed. So the dispatch center would flag the call, ARCH was needed, but we weren't available. So during the 16 hours between shifts and then on the weekends, we missed 472 calls, and that's just about half, 2/3 more than what we actually responded to. So that's a pretty significant number. And then here's just a quick map showing kind of where we responded. It's intentionally a little grainy just to maintain some level of privacy, but just to give you an idea of Kind of we're all over the city, all different types of calls in different places. So there's no real pattern, other than you can see it's a little lighter around campus area. So there's our contact information. That's just for inquiries or requests or any additional questions, but that's kind of a summary of what we've done in the last 6 months. Moving forward, we've continued with the 8 hours a day. But we've shifted our time frame a little bit earlier into the day. So from 8 a.m. to 4 p.m. right now, because our plan is to expand to a 16-hour day, and hopefully we can start that in the early July. So we're kind of shifting now to kind of prepare for that. We're just trying to get staff kind of lined up and people that can respond. So with that, I will thank you for the time and then take questions as well. Should I go to the chat for that, Karen, or? I don't know.
Yes. Yep. Yeah. Please go to the chat, and Nick, feel free to just read the question out loud and then respond. Yeah.
Yeah.
I don't
So
need to-
Mason
I don't
asked,
need to moderate that. Go ahead.
yeah, are the 911 operators trained initially and then continuing to be trained on identifying whether or not ARCH is needed in a situation, especially if the individual calling is panicked and may not be in a state of mind to articulate? Yeah, so we've had meetings with the dispatch center. We've communicated kind of our goal and a little bit about what we want to do. They haven't received any additional formal training, but they kind of know what types of calls to send to us. Sometimes they'll send them to the sergeant on duty and he'll take a look at the notes. So the little computer that's in the squad car, they can read those notes and say, okay, I think ARCH can respond to this. I think one of the things we've talked about is having a specialized person in the call center who can de-escalate on the phone. And that's something that they're kind of in favor of. We're just looking at how does that look and what kind of training would they need for that. So, and yeah, if they are panicked, depending on what types of things they're saying, we obviously want to be safe. And so if there's any potential threat of a weapon, we would send the police first. But if it's more of just mental health type issues, then it will go into those calls as well.
So quick follow-up.
Sure.
So is it always an ARCH rep, like one of you and a police officer, or are there calls where they've completely deferred to ARCH and only ARCH has responded?
Yeah, there have been those 112 calls that I said were police avoided.
Okay. Sorry, I missed that. Sorry.
Yep. Those are calls that we went on and kind of resolved whatever was going on.
Okay, gotcha. Sorry about that.
No, that's fine. How much more staff would you need to be able to respond to the 400 calls you couldn't take? If we were to staff 24 hours, I think it was another 4 people for sure who were full-time. And that would include like the overnight time, which might be a little harder to staff than an evening shift. So, and then Lisa said, how do you coordinate or collaborate with crisis mobile? I'm assuming you mean mobile crisis, which is what Gene also asked. Yeah, so we had, I don't remember exactly, there were 5 or 6 times that we were actually on the same scene or in the same room with the mobile crisis team. So mobile crisis is done, responds through CICS and Irely Ball. And so there's a 800 number that they call to activate mobile crisis. And a lot of times people will call that number. And we actually encourage people to use that because again, we're not trying to be like a competitor, but really just to catch those calls that come in the emergency situation. So we try to remind people, hey, mobile crisis is available. If they're on scene, we just kind of have a sit down with the mobile crisis team and determine, okay, what's the best resolution here? Mobile crisis does a great job of they do like 30 days worth of follow-up care for mental health issues, which we don't do at ARCH. We're more of just in that one situation at that one time. So yeah, we've worked together with them. I think it's gone well for the most part. There's just obviously some logistical things that we work out while we're on scene and kind of adapt to that. So let's see, Martha, we moved here from Annapolis in 2020. It was a town where sirens are almost constant. Ames is the dead opposite. We rarely hear sirens. Any thoughts? Yeah, that's great. A lot of times we respond, on the ambulance side of things, we respond non-emergent, and that's based on dispatch criteria as well. And so we determine, okay, this is an emergency, but it's not, lights and siren. And statistically, nationwide, like response times with and without lights and siren is not a significant number, given the risk of driving with lights and siren through red lights and things like that, where potentials for accidents can increase there. So, and again, Arch doesn't respond lights and siren. We do have those lights that I showed you, and that's just more of a safety, if we're in the middle of traffic or something. Excuse me. So, yeah, I think that's a department to department type thing. Some departments require response lights and siren all the time, and some departments use like a coding system. So, if the call's at a nursing home where there's already care being provided and it's kind of a non-emergent situation, then they don't have to respond with lights and siren. Language barriers and translators. We haven't had a huge encounter with that. I know there's a lot of international students and people here doing advanced degrees and things like that. So I anticipate it will come up, but as of yet it hasn't. Typically on the EMS side, when we're like in responding as a paramedic, then we use the language app on like Google, and that's kind of the best we can do. Once they get to the ER, they have translators who are actually in person or telehealth. Any specific cases stand out positively or negatively? Yeah, we've had to respond to some calls where the outcome was not favorable. People who've taken their own life, and we end up responding in that situation. Sometimes it's not a positive interaction with the individual, if they're out on the street and they're having a mental health crisis. Sometimes they get upset with us and they walk away, but those cases, those people come back to us. They kind of pop up here and there, and we'll encounter them multiple times. And so it's kind of a long-term goal to try to get a positive resolution, not necessarily right in that moment. Can you think of any other positive or negative cases?
What is that example of how we free up the resources to be used appropriately? So like there's that code.
Yeah, Lindsay mentioned a call where Arch was called out to an individual who was having suicidal thoughts, and they responded to that scene. If Arch was not available, then an ambulance would have been sent out. And at that moment in that day, then there was actually a person who's having a cardiac arrest that the last ambulance could respond to, because they didn't have to go to the person with suicidal thoughts, because Arch was able to respond to that instead. And so the ambulance was freed up in that case to go perform CPR on somebody who had a crisis there. So those types of things are really some of the it gets at the heart of what we're doing. We're trying to free up resources and put the right resources in the right place at the right time. So question about funding. Oh, sorry, I missed one from Mason. Would you ever refer back to police where an individual is a potential danger to themselves or others? Can you maybe clarify what you mean by refer back to the police?
Well, if you had responded to a situation and maybe the police weren't there, and you respond and you get there and determine that the situation is elevating, and maybe we need some police backup here, they could be a danger to themselves or others. Has that come up, or maybe you're already prepared for that, or in case that would? I was just curious, has that come up, or have you thought about that? Is that that something that's even something to be concerned about?
Yeah, yeah, for sure. And so if it happens in the moment, then we have a police radio that we can call them directly and have them, and so they have our location right away. So it's pretty quick. Other times, like there'll be notes, if we respond to an address and there's a note in there from the police from a month ago where that person was waving a gun around, something along those lines, we'll be able to see that, and there'll be kind of a flag on that account. And so we can request that they just come with us, and then we get there and everything's calm and okay, then they can go back to doing something, they can leave, and we'll handle the situation from there. But that's kind of always in the back of our mind, does the police presence escalate that problem, or does it, make it more complicated if they're there or not there? And so we kind of, sometimes we have to make that determination and determine whether they should come or not. So adding another shift monitor another 6 months. Oh, and monitor another 6 months. Do you mean for funding specifically, or Kent?
Yeah, I'm just thinking, so you shared that you're looking for the next period, extending or adding some more hours. I didn't know if that's a full shift. I think you shared 16 hours.
Yeah, I think we were looking to add a full shift on, and we went to the city with that proposal, and they put it in the budget proposal for this coming year. So I'm not sure if it had gotten approved yet. I haven't heard anything, but so that's kind of where we're at. Because right now the only real cost other than the maintenance of the vehicle is just the staff, the salaries, the pay, for Lindsay and I. So
yeah, Nick, Melissa McGarry here.
Oh, hey.
I don't know if you knew I was on. I'm the director of the foundation here at Mary Greeley, and Mary Greeley and the foundation have really taken the lead on funding. So as Nick mentioned, the city is looking at providing some assistance for next fiscal year, some, but not all. We're actually potentially going halvesies on the program, but we'll continue to monitor and really make recommendations about expanding and expanding, I think, smartly to make sure that we're getting sort of the best bang for the buck. But we will be asking for some philanthropic support through our foundation, at least for next fiscal year. And again, we'll continue to monitor and change up the program as necessary, and then ultimately be looking for grant funding and other ways to support this program that truly is a service and partnership with other folks in the community.
So do you tend to keep these in like 6 month type increments as you do this monitoring and scaling things?
Well, I'm told that we'll actually have a sort of a proposal, if you will, by the end of May as we look forward to the next fiscal year. But I think and Nick can probably answer this better than myself, but I think we're constantly on a monitoring kind of a situation to see, is there a way for us to change up the program to be more efficient and effective, and ultimately support the needs of our community in the biggest way possible. I think, I'm not sure that we are the 24/7 kind of community for this program, but again, I think time will tell on that. But I would guess at least quarterly we'd be looking and monitoring. But from a funding perspective, we would be looking at funding, having that approval for the next fiscal year with the program as is.
yeah, and part of what we're looking at too is, when you're working with a 911 system, there's an ebb and flow to how busy you are. So what do you do with the downtime? How can we be a little more proactive? And so that's something we're having discussions about and trying to figure out moving forward. How do we be proactive and maybe help in other ways? And so those discussions are happening as well. So,
Well, yeah, it's obvious people aren't going to all determine that they're going to have a health crisis at every 15 minutes of every day. Do you find a pattern, more in the morning, more in the evening? You're not open during the night. I mean, you had 466 responses you were unable to call upon. Boy, I'm all in. I'm just incredible what you're doing. So I don't know how you do it.
Well, I appreciate that. And yeah, there's no, I mean, once you try to figure out a pattern, you'll be scratching your head because you'll be looking at the phases of the moon, the tides, who's playing in the Super Bowl, all these kind of things, and you won't. There's no way to figure it out. Like you look at the map even that I had up earlier, it's sporadic in location. People come and go. You run into the same person for 3 weeks and then they're gone. They disappear. And they might have left town, or they might just be kind of in a good place. And so, yeah, one day we have 6, 7 calls, and another day there's 1. It's really just all over the place.
Hey, Nick.
Yeah.
I broke my own rules and didn't put this in the chat. So you'd mentioned maybe a couple dozen encounters or calls that you responded to with our youth in like maybe middle school or something like that. But just curious, and maybe it's too small of a sample size, but I mean, any sort of anecdotal kind of trends that you're noticing with responses to that group that could be something topical to discuss, or maybe not at all. Maybe it's, again, too small of a sample size. I don't know.
Well, I mean, as far as Arch goes, yeah, it is a small sample size, but as far as response on the EMS side of things too, we're just seeing it just seems like more and more kids and young people are being affected by mental health situations. And when I first started, it wasn't like that. And maybe it's just location, maybe again, you could scratch your head trying to figure it out, but it just seems like they're getting younger and younger, and the problems are not getting any easier. And so it's how do you coordinate that care with family and with other providers? And again, there's a shortage of providers in the area just in terms of counseling and mental health. I mean, there's just waiting lists and that, and Lindsay probably knows better than I do, but there's you're sometimes 2-3 months out for getting in somewhere if you're new. So yeah, it's hard, because then how do you tell someone, well, you're having a crisis today, but you got to wait 2 months to actually talk to anybody about it. So.
Right. If you have like a physical health crisis, right, you go to the emergency room. Mental health crisis, that moment, where do you go?
Yeah. And the emergency room.
You go to the ER for that too, really is the only, again, right resources in the right place. A lot of times that's maybe the only place you can go is the emergency room.
Yeah. And they do their best, but again, some of those people wait for days before they can either go get placed somewhere where they can get the help they need, and sometimes they're discharged and they don't really feel like they got the most help they could get, but then it's like, well, now I've got to do some work to follow up and get my appointments scheduled and get my prescriptions filled and things like that. So I'm not sure about that question. It's not really something in my area of expertise. So anyone else have questions? I guess I'll let Mason finish up if there's nothing else.
Yeah, unless there's another question, and we can pause for a moment in case somebody wants to unmute and ask, or drop it in the chat. We'll give folks a few seconds here. Okay, hearing none. Thank you, Nick and Lindsay. We'll hand it back over to Kent.
Appreciate that. And again, just significantly appreciate what you're doing. Per my usual, a couple of quotes. In light of fundraising and putting things together, the first one is, it's easy to make a buck. It's a lot tougher to make a difference. And that comes from Tom Brokaw. And the difference you're making is evident. And thank you for that service and your dedication. It's just so significant. The other one I have also relates, to me, it's almost a definition in my mind of what you're accomplishing. The purpose of human life is to serve and to show compassion and the will to help others. That's from Arnold Schweitzer. Again, I think it's evident in your dedication and your service to this community, and we thank you for that. The motto of Rotary is service above self, and we thank you folks for exemplifying that for each of us in our protection and our well-being. Well, with that, we will conclude with our four-way test. And I'll wait just a moment for Karen to have the opportunity to bring that up. There we are. Thank you, Karen. So, of the things we think, say, or do, is it the truth? Is it fair to all concerned? Will it build goodwill and better friendship? Will it be beneficial to all concerned? Thank you, and we'll adjourn our meeting.